Welcome back, everyone, to another edition of the weekly walkthrough with Alex and Graham, part of the Max Sports Connection podcast, brand, whatever, doing a little bit of changing things up a little bit. We'll talk about that on another segment. But as always, it's Graham joining me. Graham, we've got another great rivalry game on our hands. I feel like we're really blessed and really fortunate to get to talk about some of these great rivalry games in this conference. And we've got another one on tap this week.
Yeah, it's fun in the MAC because they space out the rivalry games for you. So you don't have to wait to the last week of the season to see all the rivals play each other. And this is another great one. We've covered, three so far? This will be our third rivalry that we're covering this year. And all of them fun to cover. This one, the rivalry that I grew up watching right in my backyard, the Wagon Wheel rivalry here. And excited to get into it.
So I'll just kind of give a little bit of a history lesson for those listening at home on this rivalry. It is officially dubbed the Wagon Wheel. We got to have a little Darius Rucker going on here in the background.
I'm an old Crow medicine show guy. I'm not about the Darius Rucker version.
And that's totally fine. But we've got the Wagon Wheel on tap for this week, as I mentioned, between Akron and Kent State. And this is a rivalry that dates back to the 40s, so it's a post-World War II rivalry. Best I can kind of find.
Well, in terms of the Wagon Wheel,
in terms of the Wagon Wheel,
Akron and Kent first played each other back in 1923. So sure. This is an old school rivalry.
Sorry, I wanted to be clear. I meant with the actual Wagon Wheel itself, not the actual rivalry. I mean, these two teams being only 10, 11 miles apart, or these two schools being 10, 11 miles apart. A lot of great history. My favorite story, though, and Graham, you've told me this story. We've seen this story spread around, true or not. I choose to believe it's true.
It's definitely not.
I choose to believe it's true. The dean of men at Kent State discovered a wagon wheel on a farm that the first president of Kent State, Dr. McGilvery, I believe, he lived there in the early 1900s or whatever. Now the legend has it, and legend is often true. Don't question legends ever. Legend has it the wheel belonged to a wagon used by McGilvery during Kent State's early years. Manchester decided, hey, this would be fun to have as like a rivalry trophy for our football teams, and thus the rivalry trophy was born. Graham, I know you probably have a slightly different version of that story, but that's the one that I was able to kind of find and source online. You being from the area, what?
No, that's the one that's probably true. It's like that one's way closer to the truth. The historic, the legendary story, the one that's definitely not true but is more fun, is both of these schools are founded by John Buchtel, which if you know your Akron history, Buchtel, big high school in Akron, actually just down the road from here. But Buchtel founds the University of Akron as well as Kent State. He's the founder of both schools, and so the story goes that while looking for a place to place his what would become the University of Akron, he's looking around and kind of scouting locations. And in Kent, in the swampy lands of Kent, he comes through a farm field, and his wagon gets stuck, and he loses a wheel from his wagon. Now, some locals like to add a little bit of local flavor where you talk about he loses the wheel of his wagon. He's so upset that he says, definitely not here, not going to put it in Kent. What an awful place to put a college. And then goes down to Akron and eventually founds the college there. So the story is, and Dr. Raymond Manchester completely makes up this story on the spot. He's on this farm that you talked about, and they uncover this wheel, and it is an old wagon wheel, but he makes up a story about this wagon wheel clearly came from John Buchtel's wagon when he was coming through here scouting locations. And so it's a wheel that is tied to both Akron and Kent, and they can fight over the wheel of their founder for the rivalry game. That's of course not true. There's no way that that's true.
I like that one way better than the other legend that's out there. But I mean, as you know, Graham, being from the area, the one game a year fans like to turn out for is the wagon wheel. You know, I feel like in the Mid-American Conference, we've got a lot of schools who are close just geographically. But of course, like the fan bases are often intertwined through work, school, church. I mean, just so many different aspects of everyday life that you see Kent State flags around, you see Akron flags around within each other's communities on a fairly regular basis. And so this is one of those games that has meant a lot to the region, has meant a lot to the schools in this area in Northeast Ohio. And especially with Cleveland State not having a football program like this is the rivalry in the area. And it's a good one. It's last 5 years, looking at some of these results, Akron broke their losing streak in this rivalry. Akron won last year at InfoCision Stadium 31-27. But year before that, Kent State won by 6, 33-27, dominated the Zips 38-10 the year before. But 2020, the year of COVID, they just offensively just took off on Akron. And then 2019, Kent State just owned this game. This was one of those games that I think it's important for fans to get involved, especially if you're an alumni from these schools. But I think it's really cool for the communities to really come out and celebrate maybe not the best football, but entertaining football in Northeast Ohio.
Well, you talk about it. This game does bring a lot of alumni back to these schools to show up and have a good time and celebrate this rivalry game. We've been out to a couple of these rivalries over the years, and we always meet folks who played for Kent State or played for Akron in the past, and they're back to check this game out again. And you're right; both of these schools kind of historically not so great at football, at least in the recent years. And so if for that reason, they don't draw the biggest crowds, but this game tends to draw a crowd regardless. It's a rivalry game. It's generally a close game. It's the stat we were talking about before we got on here. Of the last 32 meetings between the Zips and Kent State, that's going back to when the Zips joined the Mid-American Conference in 92. 14 of these games have been decided by 8 or fewer points. So we've got 14 one-score games between these teams. This tends to be a close game, regardless of what's going on with these teams. Of course, we talked about prior to last year, the Flashes had won 4 in a row, and that's going back to that high-flying offense that Kent State had not that long ago. This year, things look a little bit different for the Flashes. We've got Kenny Burns directing a mockumentary, if you will, and like John Krasinski, I'm looking at the camera wondering when these guys are going to start playing football, because it is that dumbfounding to me.
That's quite the take. And if you're a Kent State fan, if you're a fan of college football at all, you know just how rough it's been for Kent State the last 2 years. One win over the course of the last 2 seasons, seemingly switching places with Akron for the bottom of the Mid-American Conference. And you're not wrong, Graham. It's been rough for Akron or for Kent State rather, and they finally. You talk about streaks you want to end, but you don't ever want to have. Kent State finally led in a football game this year, just a week ago against Miami, because they had the ball first. They went down and they scored on Miami, and for the first time dating back to last season, they led in a college football game. And they were putting up they were giving up legendary scores to schools like Tennessee, who kicked an onside kick and recovered it up 40 in the second quarter against Kent State. It's almost laughable. And Graham, I laugh because I don't want to cry for the Golden Flashes.
It's been a tragic year for the Flashes and Kent State this year. Tragedy after tragedy. And like you said, this is the first time Kent State has led in a game, and it wasn't for very long. It's also the first time Kent State scored on an opening drive in a game.
Mm-hmm.
Regardless of whether they had the ball first or not, it's the first time Kent State scored with their opening drive, and that's also sad news for the Flashes here. Not a lot of bright spots for a team who's called the Flashes.
No, they're that flash is doing just that. It's flashing, but it's not sparking anything. But I do think, and I'm confident that Kent State can get it rolling against Akron here. And Graham, let's just dive into it. Talk to me about these Zips.
Well, the Zips are an interesting team this year. This is a guy who you've been telling me about for 3 years now, Joe Moorhead, leading the Zips, and we keep waiting to see this strategic genius from Joe Moorhead come out. Now, a big warning for Joe, this might be a hot seat type of game. UMass just fired their legendary coach who led them to a national title. Now, not the big national title, but a big national title back in the day. But this is his third stint at UMass. UMass firing their coach for going 6-28. Joe Moorhead sitting at what, Alex? 6-27.
Oh boy.
One more loss for this guy, it seems, is the rule. I'm sure Akron is not following that same pattern that UMass has, but once in future MAC member UMass firing their coach at 6-28. Joe Moorhead looking at that number, perhaps, but the Zips team looking all right this year. They have been kind of basement dwellers of the MAC. That's we got Kent State in 12th place in the conference, Akron in 10th. But when we look at the numbers, this team has been okay. That's their defense is allowing 35 points a game. That's not great. 422 yards a game. That's not great. Did I say that these numbers look okay? Because they don't. 227 pass yards allowed per game, 195 yards in the ground. You could pretty much put any running back out there and give him a career day against this Zips defense. That being said, Brian McCoy, linebacker for the Zips, is third in the MAC with 96 total tackles. There's been a couple of bright spots here. That's about it for the defensive side of the ball. Both of these teams not great in the turnover department, especially on the defensive side of the ball. They're not forcing fumbles, they're not recovering their fumbles, and they're certainly not getting interceptions. But on the offensive side of the ball, Akron's doing okay. Ben Finley, is fourth in the MAC in total completions with a $188. He's also fourth in the MAC with total passing yards, 2160, and has thrown for 13 touchdowns. Adrian Norton receiving the ball, fourth in the MAC and receiving touchdowns with 7. He's also fourth in receiving yards with 724, and he's second in the MAC in yards per catch with 19.1. This is a guy who can be electric with the football in his hands. The rushing game led by Jordan Simmons for the Zips. He's 11th in the MAC in rushing, 551 yards and 4 rushing touchdowns, tied for 10th in the conference. The offense for the Zips looks very much like other offenses in this conference. They're getting 313 yards per game, not bad. 231 through the air, 82 on the ground, only 18.6 points per game, which leads me to believe this might be a close one between the Zips and the Flashes.
It's interesting you bring all those numbers up, and they're all great numbers to have. And I think it's important in a rivalry game. And we've talked about this before with these other rivalry games we've covered, Cincinnati and Miami, and then of course Toledo Bowling Green. For me, I'm a big fan of the old phrase, throw the records out. None of that matters. It's heart against heart in a rivalry game. But when I look at numbers, one thing, and I've got the number right here, one thing that I think gives Kent State a little bit of hope, just a little bit of hope. They perform better at home than they do on the road. They get the Zips at home. The Zips don't perform as well on the road. Of course, that's an arbitrary thing. But I think when you look at total offense on the road, Akron ranks second to last in the Mid-American Conference with 262 total yards. And when Kent State's at home, they average 319 yards a game. Now, that it remains to be seen just how do I want to say it, just how well that's going to go for Kent State. I say that, of course, and I've got to talk about that embarrassing loss to Ohio, a 41-0 loss there at Dick Stadium. But I think when you come to a rivalry game like this, Kent State understands what's on the line. Even if Kenny Burns hasn't really figured it out, these players understand. These players, these seniors, have been a part of winning, games. They almost won the game last year at Infozision. It took Jeff Undercuffler a great heroic fourth quarter kind of comeback for the Zips. I like Tommy Ulatowski at home, and I'm going so against the grain here, and I recognize this, but I like Tommy Ulatowski at home. I mean, you've got some great playmakers for Kent State as well. Krishawn McCray, who is their best receiver. He's got Luke Floria, their second best receiver. These guys are both all MAC caliber guys who, if you can get the ball to them, they're going to do damage. You know, Krishawn McCray he's averaging 16 yards every single catch. He has 612 yards on the year. And then right opposite of him, again, Luke Floria, he's got 558 yards. Combined, they have 13 touchdowns. They're averaging 60 and 61 and 55 yards a game, respectively. So not great. I recognize that. But when you give the guys the ball and the opportunity to go try to score, they're the ones you turn to. I mean, you talk about ground game. I recognize Kent State does not have a solid ground game, but you've got Curtis Douglas and Kai Thomas, who on the year they've combined for about 625 rushing yards. Their issue is one touchdown. The ground game is not in Kent State's favor, and I think that's going to be where Akron has an opportunity. If they can continue to stifle this ground game and force Kent State to throw, Tommy Ulatowski has 7 interceptions. He has 12 touchdowns. You can force Kent State to throw. You're forcing Luke Floria and Krishawn McCray to be the difference makers. But I think that works in Kent State's favor, especially at home, because these guys perform really well at Dick Stadium, and I like them at home.
You know, it's interesting you're talking about the rushing game here. That's another thing that I noticed looking at these teams is that both of them give up an ungodly amount of yards on the ground in terms defensively. Not great rushing defenses here. Kent State giving up almost 265 yards on the ground per game. Now, granted, some of that is again in games like the Tennessee game you mentioned. But you know, Kent State giving up 265. Akron giving up almost 200 yards at a $195.8 there. So you would think that the ground would be a place that both of these teams have an opportunity, but both of these teams, their offensive rushing numbers have been abysmal. Kent State only 75.6 yards a game. Akron not much better at 82. It's going to be which running back steps up, don't you think? Is when it comes down to it. And can this rushing attack get going against a defense that wants to allow those rushing yards? And maybe the question is which offensive line steps up.
And I think those are all fair questions. You know, I pulled up the numbers here. Shout out to collegefootballstats.com, by the way, for having these great tables available. Against conference opponent, Kent State is actually not dead last in terms of ground rushing yards. Now they sit at dead last in terms of rushing touchdowns, but they're actually doing a little bit better than the Zips against conference opponents on the ground, sitting there at 92 yards a contest versus Akron's 88. And I think that's going to be kind of an important stat. Then when I pull it up on the defensive side, Akron still giving up 190 on the ground against conference opponents. Kent State 246 against conference opponents. So you're right. It's going to be which offensive line can give their guy a good enough hold to get through these defenses. But I think really it's going to be which defense steps up in the right moment, because neither of these backfields are superstar caliber. The Akron had Lorenzo Lingard last year, the running back, the transfer out of Florida, and he played great, but he's no longer there. It's you've got great and talented pieces in that backfield, but it's going to come down to which ground game can get established. But I think it's what I really, really love. Passing defense, Kent State is not dead last in the Mid-American Conference. And in fact, they've actually earned the top half against conference opponents, giving up 218 yards through the air. This is Kent State's opportunity. If you can do something to slow down the ground game, you have a chance if they have to attack through the air. This is the opportunity for Kent State. Only one pick on the year. In fairness, Akron has 0. But this is your opportunity if you're Kent State. You get your defense doing enough to slow down the ground game for the Zips. You've got a shot, especially if you're playing air raid defense.
But you know what's interesting here is that you're right. This is a Kent State offense that we kind of expect to have talented pieces. And for whatever reason, those talented pieces haven't shown up this year yet. And maybe they do show up in a rivalry game here. We're spending a lot of time talking about the defense. And I think that's important because both of these defenses have been, if not abysmal, almost abysmal all year long. And, when it comes to these defenses, normally you would say, yeah, they're giving up a lot of yards, but they do get turnovers. But neither of these defenses really get turnovers. So it's hard to imagine a situation where these defenses suddenly turn it on and get stops or turnovers here. We're not expecting them to make the standard plays. We're not expecting them to make the big plays. So I guess the question is going to be which ineffective unit can show up on Tuesday, whether that's the ineffective offenses or the ineffective defenses. This Kent State offense is not so bad, but they can't get it in the end zone.
Yeah,
they're averaging 14 points per game, which sounds kind of okay, although compared to the rest of college football, it's not great. But 14 points per game. But remember how often and how easily opponents are scoring on this Kent State defense. The Kent State offense has had plenty of opportunities to score this year. They just haven't. And so this is kind of the issue here when it comes to these teams is who's gonna play football. So far, Akron has shown a few times that they're capable of playing football. Kent State has yet to show that this year. Maybe Tuesday's the night, but I'll tell you what, Alex, I'm ready to make my pick. It's Akron. That's the Zips came into this contest. Line opened at -10 in favor of the Zips. It's still at -10. I don't think Akron covers that spread. I think this is going to be a one-score game, but I have the Zips winning this one on the road in Dick's Stadium.
I don't hate the prediction. I mean, that's a beautiful thing about rivalry games. You never know what's going to happen. There's that, like I said, it always comes down to who's got more heart, who wants it more in a rivalry game. I like Kent State at home. I like them snapping this losing streak dating back to their game against Akron last year. And dating back even further than that, actually dating back to their game against Central Connecticut State University in, I believe, week 3 of the regular season a year ago. I like Kent State at home. And I'll be honest, I have very little reason for it, except that they are at home. They perform better at home against conference opponents, and they're a little bit better defensively through the air. Give me the Zips give me the Flashes at home. Sorry, give me the Zips to go home without the wagon wheel. And I really like Kent State in this one. They're busting out the powder blues. Gonna look sharp. You look good, you feel good, you play good. And based off of what I've seen, the players really like this uniform combo for this week's game. So maybe if they look really good and they feel good about it, they're gonna play good.
I mean, always loved the Kent State powder blues. You mentioned, so Kent State's losing streak is up to 19 now.
Yeah.
And they are, of course, the last winless FBS team. So yeah, I mean, maybe we'll see that streak snap. One story that we didn't mention that I did want to throw out there, Tony George, who plays center for the Flashes, started his football career with the Zips. So he played in 33 games for the Zips, made 19 starts. He started at center the last 7 games for the Flashes. So he's gotten to play in this game several times now on both sides of the football, not meaning both sides of the football, offense and defense, but on both teams. So he's going to he had a share of the wagon wheel last year, and we'll see if he can bring it back to Kent and somehow maintain his wagon wheel streak here.
I love it. Before we get into the rest of the Max scoreboard and predictions this week, I want to ask you guys about downloading the Varsity app by Learfield. It's a Varsity Podcast app. It's available for free to download in the Apple App Store, the Google Play Store. You can listen live to all your favorite Division I college teams and their sports. So you want to listen to some Ohio basketball, stand up and cheer Bobcats, you can listen to that through this app. You want to listen to some Toledo Rockets football, some great calls from the Glass Bowl, you can listen to that directly through the app. You can check out calls from all the voices, not only just in the Mid-American Conference, but across every conference in Division I collegiate athletics. Voices from the Big Ten, the SEC, the Sun Belt, all of those great organizations, those great programs, the great teams. You can listen to those calls live through the Varsity app, but you can also not only save your favorite schools, you can save your favorite podcasts to download and listen to on the go. Podcasts such as the Max Sports Connection, the Sickos Committee, Group of Five, and many more available through the Varsity Network app. Make sure you guys download that today. Again, it is free in the App Store, Google Play, or Apple App Store. You can start listening to all your favorite podcasts and your favorite calls from your favorite schools today.
Just a great place to go. I mean, kind of a home central for college football content. Yep. And there's so many great college football podcasts out there right now, including this one. Any podcast that would have me must be a great podcast.
You will not hear any disagreement here.
Well, there you go.
Graham, we've got only 5 midweek games this week. And we've got one Saturday Maction game. But let's just dive into this. Of course, we made our picks for Akron, Kent State tomorrow. That is going to be on the CBS Sports Network, rather, 7 o'clock there at Dick Stadium in Kent, Ohio. Moving on over to ESPN2, we've got Western Michigan at Central Michigan, another great rivalry in this conference. The battle for the victory cannon. This is a rivalry that I admittedly would love to get up to. I wish it was on a Saturday. This is one of those that I know these stadiums get packed for this one. Big community, big crowds for this one. They've got this one at 7:30 kicking off there at Kelly Short Stadium in Mount Pleasant, Michigan. Line Western Michigan by 7. Who do you like in this one, Graham?
Well, you're talking about, I mean, Kalamazoo and Mount Pleasant, both hard places to get to, especially on a Tuesday night. So as much fun as it would be to drive out to this game, it is one that we have to live vicariously and through the television broadcast. Nice that this one's on ESPN2. We'll be able to watch it on Tuesday night. All of that to say, Broncos are favored by 7 in this one. And Western Michigan has looked so good in the conference this year. They've had a few stumbles recently. Looks like maybe they're not the top team in the conference that we thought maybe they were. But at this point, I see no reason to go against them. Broncos are going to come away victorious in this one.
All right, moving on the parent channel, ESPN, we've got Northern Illinois versus Miami, Ohio, down there at Yager Stadium. It's the Red Hawks and the Huskies. Red Hawks favored by -2.5. So that home field goal you and I've talked about on the show many, many times. Who do you like in this one, Graham?
Well, we talk about that home field goal. I also like Miami at home generally. This is a Red Hawks team that seems to step up at home. They like that Miami crowd. Now, we know these midweek crowds can be, either present or not present when it comes to Maction games. And that's true at Miami. That's true throughout the MAC. Sometimes the fans show up for these games and sometimes they don't. I generally like the Red Hawks at home, but this one goes to NIU. The Huskies are going to pull this one out. I think Northern Illinois hit that kind of mid-season dead patch where they just couldn't find a win anymore. But they're coming back. Past couple of weeks, they've looked sharper. They've looked like that team that beat Notre Dame early on. I think NIU is going to come out the rest of the season. They know that their season is on the line in this game, and I think they're going to come out and play like it. NIU for the victory here.
NIU with a win keeps their MAC championship hopes alive. Very slim, but a little few other things going on in the conference, but they keep their very slim hopes alive with a win over the Red Hawks. Moving on to the Wednesday slate, we've got Buffalo at Eastern Michigan over on ESPNU at 7 o'clock up there at Rynearson Stadium. Eastern Michigan by 2 at home. This one's an interesting one to me.
This one is an interesting one. Both of these teams, I think, occupy exactly the same spot in the conference in my mind. They're two teams who, depending on the week, they can show up and they can beat the conference best, and the next week they can lose to Akron. And it's I mean, nobody's losing to Kent State, but some teams lost to Akron. So this game is an interesting one. Normally with two teams this matched up, I would go or this close in a matchup, I would go with the home team. But just like I didn't go with the home team in the last one, I'm not going with the home team here. Buffalo has a way of winning these weird late season midweek action games. And I think the Bulls are going to win this one as well. They'll walk out of the factory with the production being a victory. This is a Buffalo win.
All right, Buffalo. They also one of the 7 teams keeping their MAC hopes alive with a victory if they can pull it off up there in Ypsilanti. Moving on to what I think could arguably be the most interesting game of the week. We've got the Toledo Rockets hosting the Ohio Bobcats. The Bobcats win. They're 1 win away from a MAC championship appearance. They're second in 3 years. Conversely, if Toledo wins, they're still very much alive for the MAC championship berth, depending on what happens between Bowling Green and Miami next week. Who do you like in this one? It's 7 o'clock, Toledo on ESPN2 at home, Rockets by 2.5. I've been impressed with Parker Navarro from Ohio, but I think Toledo's finally starting to hit their stride again.
You know what's interesting is this game, the winner of this game almost certainly goes to the MAC championship game. And it's funny because both of these teams seem to be kind of behind the 8 ball when it comes to conference standings right now. But because that last week of the season has that Bowling Green Miami matchup, this game is kind of a de facto play-in game for the MAC championship. I think Toledo's a little bit surprised that they've dropped a couple of conference matchups so far this year, and they're still within spitting distance of that conference championship game. And I don't think they're going to let that opportunity pass by. You know, being at home on Wednesday night, I think they have this opportunity to beat the Bobcats, and I think they will. I think the Rockets come out with the win here. This is probably, between this game and Bowling Green Miami next week, probably the 2 most important games in the MAC for the rest of the season. So, I always root for chaos, and the Toledo victory here unlocks some more of that chaos, gives us some more of that MAC magic. So I'm going Rockets here, victorious at home.
All right, I like it. And then back to the Saturday slate. One game, we've got the Falcons flying down to take on the Cardinals of Ball State down there at Schumann Stadium. Ball State just let go of Mike New, the 9-year head coach, who 4th all time in Ball State win history with 40 wins as the head coach. But when you look at the loss column, that 56 is pretty glaring, and he's only had 1 winning season since taking over. And I think the final straw was the loss to Buffalo. Ball State fired Pete Lembeau, brought in Mike New. Mike New lost to the guy that was let go in order to hire him. So I think a lot of things going on. I don't think Ball State's philosophy changes much at home. It's Bowling Green by 12.5 on ESPN Plus. That's a 2:00 kickoff. But what are your thoughts? Any chance Bowling Green overlooks this game to Miami?
There's always a chance. There's always a chance in the MAC that these teams fall into the trap game because they're looking forward to next week. We talked about Bowling Green Miami next week being a de facto play-in game to that MAC championship. This could be a trap game for Bowling Green. I don't think it is. You're just talking about that. Ball State is they've just lost their head coach. They are a team who has looked at best disjointed this year, and at worst bad. And so this is a matchup that Bowling Green should win. They've looked great on Saturday afternoons this year, especially these just after 2 games, the kind of 3:30 kickoffs. Now this is a 2 p.m. kickoff, but it is those afternoon games. BG tends to do very well. I think this is an easy Falcons victory. And I think they're going to cover every bit of that 12.5.
I like it. You guys heard it here first. You can trust Graham's picks. I certainly sometimes do, occasionally. And you guys can check those out. Also, as you saw, scrolling down here at the bottom, you saw all the games and the game lines, as well as where you can find the Max Sports Connection. You can find it on Twitter, TikTok, Instagram at the MSC Podcast. Follow along on YouTube, of course, at the MSC Podcast. More new content coming your guys' way. Graham, any last words before we send this out?
Well, it's we're wrapping up rather the Maction slate this year, and so take you these opportunities to get your Tuesday and Wednesday Maction in. That midweek Maction is one of the things that makes this conference so special, and we've got a few good matchups coming up here and next week. Take the advantage, watch as much football as you can. Maybe put on a few pounds because you're snacking a little bit while you watch these games, and really stay inside in the warm house and watch the Maction and get excited for the end of the year MAC championship game.
Absolutely. Well, thank you guys so much for tuning in. We appreciate it. And we'll see these rivalry games unfold this week. A couple of great ones. But then if we don't see you guys this week, we'll see you next week.